Hi, I'm Mike Genung. The purpose of this video is to educate you on what's going on with the product of pornography and take a look at what's going on with the church and porn, and then equip you to deal with the issues. It's going to get gritty in a few places, and I'm not going to do that to be sensationalistic or to freak anybody out, but just to explain what it looks like so that we understand clearly what we're dealing with. The statistics and the surveys I'm going to quote you so that you know they're not made up or a figment of my imagination. They're all going to be, you can go to roadtograce.net, that's my book page. Go to the porn statistics page, and then you can see all the sources and the links and all that there. So I'm going to start by reading a couple statements from two women who are ex-porn actresses who are now out of that scene. So the first is from Vanessa Bellman, and she writes, "The first scene I did, I got chlamydia. I later contracted gonorrhea and I had bacterial infections a lot. Although they tested me once a month, you could still have a clean test and have an STD. I had a lot of vaginal and anal tears. My first anal scene, I had to take painkillers because it was so painful. When you're on a strong painkiller, it's a lot easier to take something like anal sex and smile and act like you're having a great time. On another scene, I just started bleeding. Mentally, it's hard because you're doing something that's so unnatural." And this is from Shelley Lubin. "None of us like porn. We hated being touched by strangers who care nothing about us. We hate being degraded. Some women hate it so much you can hear them vomiting in the bathroom between takes. The porn industry wants you to think that porn actresses enjoy being degraded by all kinds of repulsive acts. The truth is that porn actresses show up on the set not knowing what they're going to do, are told by the porn producer to perform disgusting or degrading acts, and then they can either take it or leave without getting paid. Some of us caught HIV. I caught herpes, a non-curable sexually transmitted disease. One porn actress went home, put a pistol to her head, and pulled the trigger, and now she's dead." A couple more statistics. The average life expectancy of a porn performer is 36 years. And more than 500 porn actors and actresses have died from AIDS, suicide, homicide, drug overdose, and premature death. And more than 2/3 of them have herpes. So the product you're looking at on screen, if you're viewing pornography, is not what you think it is. They make it out to be an illusion to where the actors and actresses are having this awesome time, they're having this great erotic experience, and then it gives you this impression that you're missing out on something. But the truth is, all of what I just shared to you, the porn product is all about death, destruction, destroying the lives of the people who are in those movies, destroying the lives of the people who are watching those movies. Every time somebody watches a porn movie, what they're really doing is they're funding, approving of, and encouraging the porn industry, which is destroying lives. So after God set me free in 1999 from sexual sin, from the bondage to lust, I wanted to help, and I started kind of looking into surveys, statistics on porn use in the church. And because it was rarely discussed, I always assumed that maybe 2% of people struggle with porn, or 5% at the most. And back then there was a widely spread stat that came out of a survey where in their big stadium events, Promise Keepers were finding that half the men in the church have viewed porn within the past 90 days. So fast forward 15 years, and we're going to take a look at how we're doing now. Most of what I'm going to read you is from surveys in the past 12 months. So this one came out June of last year. One survey from Christian Newswire, 68% of Christian men and 50% of pastors confess to viewing pornography weekly And then another, last year, a pastor of a 20,000 member Calvary Chapel Church in Florida resigned over porn and adultery use. In a recent Christian Mingle study, 716 Christians were surveyed. 90% said they would be comfortable with premarital sex. And then another, one youth minister states that 90% of the kids who come to him for help, all from Christian families, have addictions to pornography. Another survey, 21% of Christian teenage girls admit to texting a naked photo of themselves. And from a survey of UK Christians, 75% of Christian men view porn at least monthly, 41% of Christian men are addicted to porn, and 30% of church leaders view porn regularly. Harry Schomburg is a guy who holds workshops helping people recover from sex addiction and porn addiction. He works with people from every gamut of the church, from the senior pastor all the way down. And he writes that one missions agency told him that 80% of their applicants voluntarily indicate a struggle with porn, resulting in staff shortages on the mission field. A seminary professor told him that we no longer ask our entering students if they are struggling with porn, but how much. We assume now that every student is viewing porn, and now the issue is how far deep are they? And then again last year, a survey of Canadian researchers showed that the U.S. states with the greatest religious and politically conservative affiliation are apt to search the most for sex online. In her book, Sex, Lies, and the Media, Eva Marie Everson quoted a story where a friend of hers met with a hotel owner, and the guy was telling him about their ministry to porn, and the hotel owner just started busting up because whenever a Christian convention comes to town, then the porn sales shoot up through the roof. And this isn't the only time I've read that story. I've seen that from other sources too, that Christian conventions tend to light up porn sales in the hotels. So when I read this, it breaks my heart, and there's just one conclusion I can come to, which is that the church is the porn industry's biggest customer. So what's the big deal? I mean, isn't porn just pictures? I mean, it's usually what it is as a guy or a girl, because women struggle with this stuff too. Is it just a man or a girl masturbating to pornography? They're alone. Maybe it doesn't have any effect on them. So is there really cause for concern here? So this is news stories from the last 3 weeks. Last week, senior pastor was arrested on child porn charges. The week before, a Baltimore police arrest a church youth group leader for child porn. Another article, Sunday school teacher arraigned on child porn. Arkansas pastor arraigned on child porn. Baptist youth pastor sent to prison for child porn. Did you know that every week in the U.S., at least 1 or 2 people in the evangelical church end up going to jail because of child pornography? Most people don't understand that this will take you where you don't want to go. Once you light the fires of lust, you don't know what it's going to do to your life. I would have never imagined as a single man, as a single Christian man, that when I got married, I would have committed adultery 1.5 years later. What most people don't understand is this will destroy your life. Just porn is enough to destroy a marriage and a family and send you to jail if you let it take you there. 56% of divorce cases now have one person who are hooked on pornography. So let's look at what it does to a person briefly. First off, it screws up their character. Lying, hiding, and deceiving always accompanies sexual sin. Usually what happens is a guy gets hooked on porn in his teen years, and then he spends the next 10, 20, 30 years acting out in isolation. He doesn't tell anybody, he's too ashamed, he's too fearful, the whole package. They get married in their 20s, they don't tell their wife, and then what happens is we get an email from a wife in her 40s, 50s, or even 60s saying, hey, I just discovered my husband of 30 years has been viewing pornography. What I do, my whole marriage is blown apart. So the lying and the hiding always keeps them in bondage. It makes them sex and self-absorbed. And we get emails from wives saying that, hey, I try to confront my husband on this stuff. He's blaming me for it. And that's because what happens is he gets in so deep that lust is now the biggest thing in his life. And anybody who gets in the way of that is going to get lashed out at. And the most scary thing for me when I was involved with pornography is what it did to my heart. Now, I was involved, porn took me to sex of prostitutes, adultery, and other places I didn't think it was going to take me. But over the years, after getting into it for almost 20 years in my mid-30s, I remember there was a time I viewed pornography, and normally I would feel guilt and shame and the conviction and all the junk that goes along with that. Well, this time I did not feel anything. I felt completely numb. My heart was just a rock. And when a guy gets to the point where his heart is hardened that badly, anything can happen. And that's the danger of this problem. Anything can happen can mean porn is enough one day, he goes to a prostitute. It could mean he shipwrecks his faith. I've heard, we get some emails from guys who are saying, you know what, there is no more hope. This whole Christian thing isn't doing it for me. God isn't strong enough for me. I've failed too much. So this to me is the most frightful thing, because if it hardens your heart too much to that point where it's a rock, you could even walk away from God. And if that doesn't bust our heart or break our heart, then I don't know what will. I'll read you a couple quotes so you know this isn't just me. Given the Christian understanding of the spiritual life, we're not capable of simultaneously pursuing our lusts and sanctification. The only resolution involves eventually conceding to the pull of one or the other. It's either God that's going to own you or lust that's going to own you. You cannot have both. And then another article from the Christian Post. If you accept the modern world's view on sex and abandon Christianity's teaching, you will soon abandon Christianity. People don't like to hear that, but it's true. Everybody knows the big thing that blew up when Phil Robertson of the Duck Dynasty movie made a statement about homosexuality and what happened. Everybody all of a sudden went to war against what was going on with those outside the church condemning Phil, and hundreds of thousands of people on Chick-fil-A Day went and had a chicken sandwich to show their support. And all these things are good because we're showing our voice. But I'm going to tell you, I firmly believe we got our priorities all jacked up. And this is why I say that. How many people are going to lose their marriage because of what happened with Duck Dynasty or what happened with Chick-fil-A? How many people are going to jail because of child pornography? Or how many people would end up going to jail because of what this has happened? How many people are going to have their lives destroyed because of sexual sin? And the statistics I just read you show that 2/3 of the church is corrupt with sexual sin. So we can go on the offensive about homosexuality all day, but the issue is that if the church is corrupt with sexual sin, we are lukewarm, and there's no way a lukewarm culture, a lukewarm church, can be the salt that preserves a nation. Let me read you Luke 14:35. Salt is good, but if salt has become tasteless, what will it be seasoned? It is useless either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown out. If you go back and you look at that verse, what it's saying is if we lose our salt, we're worse than crap. I mean, it's not even fit for the manure pile. And that's what I don't think people are understanding, is that when you have people that are engaged in porn like I was, or sexual sin, it destroys their walk with the Lord. It destroys their effectiveness. It destroys their love relationship with God. You can't be passionate about lust and be passionate about God at the same time. So I'm saying our priorities are backward, that we need to put a mirror up to the church first and take a hard look at who we are and what we've become. Because if we don't, the moral collapse around us is going to continue, because the church is not the salt and light it should be. You cannot be salt and light by going out there and trying to shove religion down people's throats. You become salt and light by becoming so in love with God that the overflow of your life affects people around you. Otherwise, what happens is the world looks at us and they say, those guys are a bunch of hypocrites. They preach one thing, but then they go and they're looking at porn or visiting prostitutes or committing adultery. We lose our voice when we're not willing to take a hard look at who we are. One professor at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary called pornography the greatest moral crisis in the church today. Above issues of divorce, above issues of homosexuality. He said Christians can rail against homosexuality, but then go to the computer and feed their addiction to porn. Josh McDowell said porn is undermining the church far more than gay marriage, and it is destroying pastors, church members, and their marriages. I talked to a friend of mine last year who I've known quite a while, and he's all into theology and doctrine. There's nothing wrong with that. He was telling me about a new church he was going to and how he liked the way they preached the word and the theology. And then I asked him, well, do they ever talk about sexual sin and porn? And his response was immediate. He said, oh no, we never talk about that. So I'm thinking, what is wrong with us that we don't have the guts? I mean, it's like we're in doctrine and theology, head knowledge land, but we're not able to reach in the stuff that's destroying the church. We've got it all backwards. We've got to get to where people are and what they're going through. If you look at all the Old Testament prophets, they pinpointed the specific sins of the day that people were going through, and they went after them, no holds barred. And that's what we have to start doing. We need a mirror in the church before we go out and start trying to attack the world. Why is it that nobody is putting this together, that lukewarm men and women make a lukewarm church, which means no salt, which means the society is going corrupt? I think the U.S. is in this moral freefall because the church is losing its salt. We get our salt back, maybe some things will start to change. So are pastors taking this seriously? This is from a survey from last year. 1,000 pastors were asked to estimate how many of their church members view porn on a weekly basis. 43% of these declined to answer the question. 62% of what was remaining said that less than 10% of their congregation view porn weekly. 4% said that half or more of their members view porn weekly. So less than 5% of pastors think this is a big issue. So let's get into why we're not confronting sexual sin. The first reason is fear. The Reverend Heath Lambert hears one of two responses when he tries to get pastors to talk about porn in their churches. The first one is he hears is porn isn't a problem in my church, which backs up the numbers I just read to you. And the second one is rooted in denial. He says, pastors shake their heads and say, I can't talk about this. Do you know what the people in my church would do if I started talking about porn? I can't talk about this from the pulpit. I don't really see standing before God and giving him those reasons. Not with the information we have that's constantly out there. When I see the Bible, I see people that boldly spoke the truth. The second reason that we're not confronting sexual sin is the philosophy of tolerance has corrupted the church. And what do I mean by that? If you listen to a lot of the Christian marketing that's out there today, a lot of it's on keeping things positive and encouraging. Or, and there's nothing wrong with that. We all need encouragement. But how that is extended into the church, what that plays out is keep it positive, encouraging. Don't offend anyone. Don't say anything. Don't make them uncomfortable. Don't make them squirm. So a lot of what happens, sometimes what happens in church is we get a nice, tidy sermon with all the loose ends tied off, 3 application points, and then everybody goes home on a pink cloud. But when I look at Scripture, there were a lot of times when Jesus just nailed the truth. And it didn't matter, it didn't seem to matter how the people took it. He just put it out there. And in my own life, I just know I desperately need to hear the truth, no holds barred. That doesn't mean I need some 50s style brimstone and fire preacher with his veins bulging out screaming at me. That's not going to work. I just want to know the truth so I can deal with it, so I can grow. Sometimes I need that truth that hurts, because those are the things that cause growth in my life. So when we get stuck in this, we want to keep everything positive and encouraged, and Jesus loves you, and that's all there is to church. We're a mile wide and an inch deep. That's not what we want. If we want to be salt and light, we're going to have to start going deeper than that. 2 Corinthians 5 gives us the next reason that we're not talking about sexual sin. It is reported there is immorality among you, sexual immorality, and immorality of such a kind as does not exist among the Gentiles, that someone has his father's wife. You have become arrogant and have not mourned, so that the one who has done this deed will be removed from your midst. The other reason we're not talking about sexual sin is our pride and arrogance. We are the American church. We have the greatest seminaries in the world. We've got our doctrine down, our theology down. We spend tens of millions of dollars sending people all over the world to evangelize the lost. It could not be that 2/3 of the church is corrupt with sexual sin, right? That's our pride and our arrogance talking. Just because we have knowledge, just because we have wealth, just because we have all those things doesn't mean that we don't have serious fissures and cracks that have to be dealt with. And then 2 Corinthians 5 gives us the other reason, where it says, we become arrogant and have not mourned. We're not brokenhearted. We don't see what's going on under the hood in the church. The emails I get all the time from wives, and you can just see the pain they're in, who've just discovered what the husband, who they thought is a Christian, what he really is. Is their marriage going to make it? Is their family going to make it? There's a lot of marriages that don't make it. When I was doing the research on what pornography really is, what the porn actress is, I just wanted to break down crying. Because the idea that many people are dying from producing that product, and the church is supporting that product, if that doesn't make you want to throw up and just cry your eyes out, I don't know what will. And I hate seeing, I'm a product of a divorce, and I hate seeing children lose their father or their mother. And the last reason that we're not dealing with sexual sin is because as a church, we don't realize that we're at war, and we don't act like we're at war. This is not the 50s anymore. This is not Lieber to Beaver time. This is 2015, where there's a moral collapse going on around us. We cannot act like a church from the 50s anymore. We have to come to realize today that there is a gigantic battle to tear the family apart, tear marriages apart, destroy lives, and that the enemy has got a giant foothold in the church today. You're not going to deal with that by singing praise and worship songs and getting into doctrine mode. You've got to address the specific issues, and you've got to go to battle. I didn't know anything about spiritual warfare until I got in this ministry. It was like walking into a war zone in my pajamas. I got hit hard from every direction, and the enemy, if he didn't attack by causing distractions or technical problems or other things, he tried to get me to put my foot on the gas so I burned myself out. He's playing for keeps for your marriage, your church, your pastors, the whole game, and that's the mentality we have to take. So now let's get into why we must deal with sexual sin in the church. First off, sex is all over the Bible. A couple of examples are Sodom. It mentions the men who wanted to rape the angels. A little further, in Jacob's family, Reuben had sex with his father's wife. Judah had sex with his daughter-in-law, who he thought was a prostitute. So obviously, Judah probably was having sex with other prostitutes as well. I don't think this was an isolated incident. You have the story of Samson, who was having sex with prostitutes. There's David and Bathsheba when they committed adultery. That's sex in the context of sin, but there's also plenty about sex in its proper context in marriage. Proverbs 5:19, let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth. As a loving hind and a graceful doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times. Be exhilarated always in her love. Song of Solomon 7, how beautiful are your feet in sandals, O prince's daughter. The curves of your hips are like jewels, the work of the hands of an artist. Your navel is like a round goblet. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle. Your neck is like a tower of ivory. Your eyes are like pools in Heshbon. The king is captivated by your tresses. How beautiful and how delightful you are, my love, with all your charms. Your stature is like a palm tree, and your breasts are like its clusters. I said, I will climb the palm tree. He wants to get after it with his wife. I will take hold of its fruit stalks, and oh, may your breasts be like clusters of the vine. We should not be afraid to talk about sex in church. There is no reason to not talk about sex in church. If God doesn't have a problem with it, we shouldn't have a problem with it. And these last two verses, I think me and my wife got to do some Bible study tonight, because I'm kind of liking where it's going there. The other reason that we must talk about this issue in the church is because Paul busted the Corinthian church because of what one guy did in 2 Corinthians 5. One guy. What do you think Paul would do if he was told that 2/3 of the men in the Corinthian church were masturbating to pornography? Think about that for a second. One guy. He would have freaked out. He would have torn his robe, spoke in tongues, and he'd have probably done everything he can to get over there and say, hey, we got a problem we got to deal with. And then the other reason is Jesus busted 2 churches in Revelations about not dealing with sexual sin. Let me read for you from Revelations 2. I know your deeds and your love and faith and service and perseverance, and that your deeds of late are greater than at first. But I have this against you, that you tolerate the woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, and she teaches and leads my bondservants astray, so that they commit acts of sexual immorality and eat things sacrificed to idols. So right there we know that this is an issue that Jesus is passionate about. And the other reason is that Jesus came to set captives free. He came to seek the lost. So between those two mission imperatives, how can we not want to help the hurting and help the broken? One of the surveys that came out last year, it came out that 90% of Christians believe the church does not adequately support those who struggle with sexual issues or pornography. So your people are dying for answers. They want to know how to overcome this. They want to know how to overcome temptation. Please don't keep walking away from this because you're too scared anymore. So now I'm going to get into some solutions on what we as a church can do about it, beginning from what to do on a Sunday or the weekend services all the way down to men and women who struggle, and as also parents. So as I move through this, please remember all we've talked about, how serious this is, what it's doing to marriages, what it's doing to families. Also keep in mind what it does to the man's heart that I talked about, that it hardens it up. And so guys that are in that position need to be confronted, and so that's where we're going to begin. On a Sunday morning, you need to confront your entire congregation about this issue. Some churches will want to say, okay, it's a sex thing, so we're going to go to like a men's conference where 20% of the men will show up. We'll hide it in the men's conference and deal with it one Saturday morning, and that'll be it. But the problem with that is in several different places. One is the men who are struggling are all isolated. So the guys who really need to hear this probably a lot of them aren't going to show up. Second is there's a lot of women struggling with pornography and sexual sin too. And the third is the wives are hurting. This all affects the wives. So you want your entire congregation to hear this. So your approach is going to be confront. And when I sit down and talk to one of my kids, I don't, because they've done something hurtful or wrong, I don't blast them, but I just lay the cards out on the table. I said, here it is, this is what you're doing, you're going to hurt yourself, and that's all you need to do, just speak the truth, like I've been doing this whole video. So you're going to begin by setting the standard in Matthew 5, where Jesus said to look on a woman with lust is to commit adultery with her. So anytime a man even looks at a woman, or if he's masturbating to porn, it's sin and it's adultery if he's married. And then you want to get into unwinding all of the justification, the denial, the self-righteousness, the pride, the fear, the rejection, the shame. You've got to start with the justification and the denial. A guy doing porn must not walk out of your church feeling any sense of comfort that he can ever blame his wife or anybody else again. You've got to pound it through clearly that it's 100% his choices that are taking him down the pit that he's in. He cannot play games with it. He cannot screw around. He's got to see that this will destroy his life. So you've got to go for it all the way. And then what I suggest is that you have 7 to 8 weeks where you walk your congregation through the things they need to know to properly deal with and overcome lust in their life. So I'm going to put up on the screen the topics that I recommend that do include masturbation, getting out of isolation, dealing with the heart issues that drive lust, and also ministering to the wives. What happens in this instance is everybody focuses on the men and the husbands, getting them free, but then the wives get the doggy bag out of this whole deal. If the wife does not heal from all the betrayal, the pain, and the anger, we can still lose the marriage. So you've got to speak to that and help them as well. My book, The Road to Grace, provides everything you need to walk your congregation through the steps to recovery and healing. So now briefly I'll talk about pastors who are viewing pornography. The statistics have been showing that 30 to 50% of pastors are viewing porn, and I do talk to pastors, senior pastors, who are trapped in this stuff. One guy told me he was terrified of his elder board finding out, and he was a senior pastor, because if they found out, boom, he's fired. Our pastors are flesh and blood men with the same impulses, the same evil, wicked flesh that we all have. They're not Jesus walking on water. The worst thing you can do is put this big heavy thing on your pastor that he's got to be perfect. What we should be doing in the church is surrounding our pastors with a group of men who will hold them accountable, who will keep their mouths shut, and then can support them and walk them through their stumbles and failures in life, and they do have them. Now, if a pastor is going out and having sex with prostitutes and committing adultery, that's something different. He needs to step down for a while because there's a lot that he's going to need to heal from. If a pastor is struggling with porn, maybe you can keep it quiet for a while, help walking him through the process, and he can find freedom. And the blessing of that is we need more pastors coming out who said, you know what, I struggle with this stuff, God set me free, and here's what the path looks like. We need more transparency from the pulpit, not just somebody saying, you know what, lust is sin, don't do it. Anybody can do that. Now I want to move from pastors to the men who struggle. Maybe you've been hearing this and thinking, well, hey, this ain't my fault because my pastor hasn't dealt with porn. But you are 100% accountable to God for your decisions. The thing I want to tell you is you've got to go all out, no matter, your pastor may never talk about porn or sexual sin. You are still responsible for your life and your recovery and healing. You have to go all out and quit playing games with this stuff. The next is I want to talk to the wives for a minute. And as I mentioned before, the wives get the doggy bag. They get left out. I hear it from wives all the time that I tried to find help in the church. There is nothing there. I tried to go to a church and get help. One wife told me just a few days ago, she went to a pastor with her husband, tried to get help, and he just flat out said, I can't help you, go pray. So the thing I want to tell the women is the reason that wives aren't finding help in the church is because you're all laying back in the weeds. We need you women to start sounding off. We need your voices loud and clear that we're sick of our husbands playing with this stuff and nobody helping us and pastors not saying anything. When the women of the church start rising up and making their voices heard, it's going to freak people out. It's kind of like that MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. You get a couple pissed off wives together and maybe we can start, it'll help this whole movement thing and people will start taking it more seriously. You women who have lost your marriage and paid the ultimate price, we need your voices. You have experience. You can help other women. You can make a difference. Please don't think just because you lost your marriage or about to lose your marriage, you're a failure. You're not. Your husband made his own decisions. He is 100% responsible for his decisions. You are not a failure. The biggest lie the enemy tries to shove down a wife's throat was that it was his fault, your fault, that you didn't give him enough sex, or that you weren't the perfect woman. That's a load of crap. The issue is his own sin problem. Wives, we need you out there. We need you to starting groups for other women. We need you. We need your voices. So next, I want to talk to parents. 99% of the guys and girls who get hooked on pornography or other sexual sin, it started in their teen years or earlier. I hear from a lot of men that they got hooked when they were 8, 9, 10, even that young, 11, 12, 13. One guy who was a teenager emailed me and told me he had been addicted for 3 years to pornography and his parents had never said a word about it. What the church does a lot is we do damage control. We wait till the building is halfway burned down. We see we got a big mess in our hands and then we say, maybe we ought to pray about doing something. So I want to get to the whole roots of this problem and address parents. So if you're a parent of if your kid is 10 years old and you haven't had the sex talk, it is too late. Because little Johnny, his buddy at school, has an iPhone that is not protected from the internet. It's wide open access. And then little Johnny's buddy is going to be showing him the porn sites he discovered. The other issue is no child should have an iPhone or a smartphone with wide open internet access. The problem we have today is we have a lot of entitlement parents. They just give their kids stuff and they don't even think about what they're doing. ABC News did a poll a little while back of 19,000 parents. Kids were viewing porn as early as age 6. A child, a 6, 7, 8-year-old, does not have the maturity to handle a smartphone with wide open internet access. My daughters last year were 10 and 12 and they both saved up money and bought an iPad. We do not allow them internet access. It's shut down or password protected. You've got to start saying no to your kids and realizing where their limitations are, and you've got to protect them from the stuff that's out there until they're old enough and wise enough to handle it properly. It's up to you to porn-proof your home. For some of us, and myself included, that means we shouldn't have cable TV. Now, I don't want to get into a legalism list, and for some people it works. But you've got to realize the chances are high that you're going to be asleep one night and your kids are going to stay up till midnight or 1 or 2 because that's old people like to go to bed earlier. And what are they going to find at midnight when they start flipping channels and mom and dad are not around? The chances are high if you've got cable TV that sooner or later they're going to stumble onto a sexually explicit sex scene. And that's just not cable TV, that's today's network TV. So you've got to take the responsibility in your home to make sure that your kids can't access that stuff. The other thing is you've got to have very clear conversations with them about what porn is. You've got to talk about masturbation. You've got to talk about sex and adultery and what this will do to their life. And you've got to do it before they're age 10. Now, it really sucks that we have to kind of like mess up their innocence and go this early, but this is the reality of the world we're living in. You can't just stuff your head in the ground and say, well, I'm gonna not deal with it and just hope. You can't hope anymore. That's not good enough. If you want to keep your kid from being addicted, you're going to have to maintain good relationships with them, and you're going to have to address sex with them at an early age. Let me read you a statement from a guy named Victor Marx, who ministers to youth a lot. He says, Christian parents are looking the other way when their teenagers are having sex in their own home. There is no accountability and there's no backbone. Youth ministers are saying that oral sex is okay for teens, and they themselves are promiscuous and committing adultery. Where there is no purity, there is no power, and the church is weak and anemic. That's what I've been saying from the beginning. Parents, you cannot check out on this deal. You've got to be engaged in it, and you've got to be clear about it. You've got to help your kids walk through the minefields of life. So I want to finish where we started with the porn industry. We send tens of millions of dollars to Timbuktu evangelizing the lost. I think it's time that we start looking at the mess in our own turf. The U.S. is the biggest producer of porn. The U.S. is the biggest consumer of porn. We put out the majority of the porn movies, which are thousands every year. So it's time to make the porn industry a mission field and to peel off some of the money that's going to countries thousands of miles from us, to start praying down the walls of the porn industry, to start some people saying, here I am, send me. And this isn't going to be for everyone. I don't think that would be for me, but there are some people out there that God could powerfully use. And we should start getting behind the ministries that they're making inroads and making a difference. So please let me help. Please email me if you got questions. I've been in this game for a long time. I believe firmly this message needs to be in every single church, men's group, or anything that has to do with the parachurch ministry or missions organization. So thanks for listening, and let me hear from you.